go. Welcome everyone to our fifth PsyChicks panel event. Thank you so much for joining us in the afternoon or the evening. Our panelist Kate here, she's got a European time zone right now, so she is 11 p.m. at night. So we're all going to watch her and make sure she doesn't fall asleep on us carefully. No, I hope this conversation is engaging enough to keep Kate and everybody else with us today. To anybody watching on the replay, hello there in the future. Tonight's panel is all about your authentic spiritual expression without appropriation. There is often a concern people have, and because nobody wants to do anything bad or accidentally hurt anybody's feelings or appropriate something that they shouldn't, sometimes there's a feeling over, am I doing this right or am I okay to be doing this when exploring different rituals, ceremonies, practices. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight with these panelists. We have our three questions prepared, and each panelist has the questions in advance so they can be as prepared as they'd like for these questions. And we're going to try to bring some substance and depth to this while also offering different perspectives, because that's the intention behind these panels. So this evening, the panelists that I've chosen, they'll explain why they've been chosen or what makes them a good fit for this conversation, because it's going to align directly with the unique work that they do. And today I am really excited to have these three members of our collective with us today. So I'm going to bounce it to Kate right now, and she can tell you a little bit about herself. Hi, Kate.
Hello. So for those of you who haven't met me yet, hello. I'm Kate Graham. I normally call myself these days a shamanic oracle and artist, and there's a number of things that I do. But Brandy said I can breathe and take my time, so I'm going to actually explain them instead of often I just try and rush through and be like, I'm going to find the closest one that matches what we're currently talking about. And I find a lot of people in this realm do that. Like they pick like their closest identifier based on who they're speaking to, which I think actually has a lot to do with what we'll end up talking about later today. And so I have really been following an ancestral healing journey and living nomadically for many years. Actually, ever since I joined the PsyChicks, pretty much. I've mostly been nomadic or in another country. And so, like, another country than where I was born. So that I think helps shape how I view the world and has given me a lot of different experiences and being in different places and different groups and being with different lands has shaped how I have come to see working with healing in general. And so I think that's part of why I was chosen to be here. And as well, I really do believe in authentically expressing ourselves and being like our truest selves the best way that we can. And that like that above all is the medicine that the world needs. It's certainly what I've needed is to become more and more of myself. So part of becoming myself has also been getting into artistry. And so now I'm shifting my work into doing more artist-based work from a healing lens, from the shamanic healing lens, working with land and spirit and the connection to non-ordinary and to things that make me rageful about our world, things that I really believe need healing, and my ancestral roots as well, creating music for that and a film for that. And yeah, and I'm also the founder of Oracle Fest, which is like a major baby of mine. And Oracle Fest being a worldwide online events and also media company movement vision, where I bring a lot of different spiritual industry leaders together on a variety of topics. Because I saw that a lot of people would be like, oh, it's only star seeds or like only mediums or something. And it just felt like we needed more and more spaces similar to PsyChicks where we can have like a plethora of a wide variety of people all connecting and heralding the importance and the value of all of us doing this work in all of our very unique ways. So I'm all for all of us bringing our like most unique pathway out. And for me, it is like many, many twists and turns. So very creative, spiritual, etc. I'll say briefly, I started my work in healing with multiple different modalities like Thai massage and yoga, and reflexology and aromatherapy and hypnotherapy, and the shamanic work has all really linked together to create a very wide practice. And I've done thousands of psychic readings now at this point. Probably like over 5,000, but I stopped counting. It was like really weird to keep counting. And then I write a book as well on psychosis, mania, delusions, and a shamanic new lens on psychotherapy. So those are all the things that get me super jazzed and excited. So hi, that's why I'm here.
Thank you. And Jana?
Unmute. There we go. Thank you for having me, Brandy. This is always fun to do different panels. Over the last 5 years, as I've jumped into this world professionally, I have been doing lots of international presentations and international retreats. So it's always fun to share space. So if you don't know me, I'm Jana Betlock. I live here in the United States, in Colorado, where I am primarily based. This work came to me very organically growing up in North Georgia, the wild child with the snakes and the rocks and the bare dirty feet. And I really didn't know as a child how much information I was gathering and learning from being the wild child in the forest. As I grew up, you jump into society and you find a career and you get married and you have children. And I ended up doing all of those things and experiencing a lot of loss, a lot of trauma, a lot of things that shaped who I am today, connecting with my ancestral lineage that have also been through a lot of those things. So I became a teacher, got my master's in leadership, which I now help people with as well, with authentic leadership. But through the world of jumping into society, you lose yourself a little bit. And I got to a point where I wanted to regain everything that I knew. I just didn't know where it was going. So things got really clear and focused when I said yes to my shamanic calling about 5 years ago and went professional. So now I am so grateful that I get to offer, and I did write a list because, like Kate, that's sort of the multi-potentialite wide range of things, because our life experiences come to us and we receive these ancient downloads of information that we get to share. So now I get to do a lot of shamanic energy work, bone and curio tossing for divination, which is a ton of different fun that's been passed down through other lineage, which I am native. So I do claim that quite honestly and with a lot of respect and reverence for that history. And I have gotten lots of different certifications through my work as well, just because some people really value putting in that work, not just the experience. So I come to the table with not just the life experience, but with a lot of real training as well. Trauma-informed somatic work through a program that I wrote working through chakra work. Plant medicine, mainly psilocybin, that I help people with all over the world and offer retreats here in Colorado and internationally. I've lots of beautiful crystal healing. Stones called to me since I was little, and they're always either on me, with me, around me. There's just a lot of beautiful work with the stone people that I love. There's a group called the Intuitive Parenting Spirit Wise Village that I've really been jumping into. I've been I've been a parent for 23 years. I've done a lot of different parenting classes and work over the years with gentle parenting and attachment parenting and different modalities and styles. So leading different parenting classes, advice, world programs, supporting parents to be the best that they can be with spirit-led opinions and life and choices, and noticing the spirit within their children, not just themselves, has been beautiful work. I offer a lot of different workshops, and that's the work that I enjoy the most, is the one-to-one in-person work, sometimes group work online, but I really value the one-to-one relationships I get to create with people. So there's the majority of what I get to do, and I'm super excited to be offering all of those things, including 3 non-toxic product lines, because as a shamanic practitioner, I believe very strongly in taking care of yourself, honoring your body, respecting the space and planet around us with not using a lot of toxic things that hurt her. I want to bring the natural aspect. So Poofy Organics, Purium for supplemental foods items, and LifeWave patches as a natural healing modality with photobiomodulation therapy that has personally supported me in a huge way. So if any of that's interesting, reach out. But I really am grateful to be here and sharing this conversation with both Josephine and Kate. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And Josephine?
I am so excited to be here and really believe that we have some kindred spirits here among us. So my full name is Josephine Patricia Jarvis, and I go by Josephine Patricia with my art, ancestry, alchemy, and metaphysical work in that I also practice in the United States clinically as an occupational therapist. And one of my favorite things about the history of occupational therapy is that we got started with the arts and crafts movement, which was born throughout Europe and parts of the United States, where communities felt that the advancements of industry and the initial rise of the industrial age, that we were losing a sense of our own authentic personhood and spirituality that gets expressed through craft and making things with your hands and building community. So it was a movement that looked at how industry impacted our emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And that's a big part of what brings me here to PsyChicks. There are many ways in which the healthcare system in the United States, in many ways, are almost starting to unravel. And so I have been reconnecting not just with the ancestral roots of my profession of occupational therapy, but as a neurodivergent human and spiritually expansive human, which I seems like all of us as a panel are multi-passionate and likely multi-dimensional. For me, healing from how the current systemic institutions, particularly in the United States, have been evolving, has resulted in a lot of burnout and moral injury for myself. And so I actually revisited right before COVID, I had somewhat of a traumatic exit from working in school-based practice where I was attempting to offer supports for students kind of like me that had learning disabilities or learning differences. However, I found those settings so challenging to work in that I turning to women's circles online was a place where I was feeling a breath of excitement and empowerment. However, I had some trepidation about it. This was around 2018 at that time because a lot of the communities I was following, there was a lot of concerns about cultural appropriation at the time. And I really respond to that. Those of us that are sensitive in the soul and just don't want our legacy to ever harm other communities and want to be historically and culturally mindful, that brought me into quilting. So, both with my own physical practice and my own ancestral lineage, the answer for me has been connecting with my own heritage, my own line, with cultural mindfulness and awareness. So, I've been doing a lot of work around how we can rewild sort of and revive a folk arts and crafts movement for the contemporary age. And what I love about quilting is that we can sort of weave a patchwork quilt that everyone can be appreciated and everyone can belong. And quilting in its authentic roots, right, was scrapping together bobs and bits into something that was woven out of life-affirming intentions for the future. And so I love navigating this landscape of how we can envision futures beyond appropriation as well, where we can cultivate mindful belonging and healing together with a lot of the interwoven ancestral wounding that's taken place, particularly with the evolution of capitalism and some of the unraveling that's currently happening. I think spiritual healing, it can be so vital to how we can navigate this together. So I like to facilitate that work here in PsyChicks through rewilding the mythic self, which I have a free school community and have offerings here. So I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about yourselves and the work that you do. And we're going to move right away into our questions. And it's going to be again around but we will alternate orders of who starts to make it fair for everyone. So the very first question, and it's going to Kate first off, is when someone is exploring spiritual practices, ceremonies, rituals, or traditions, what do you believe they should consider? And how can they engage with a practice in a way that honors its origins and respects the culture that it comes from?
Yes. Beautiful big question, as I knew all of these would be coming into this. And I share the sentiment that there's lots of similarities here of being multi-passionate and sensitive, I think, to a great degree. And probably because all of us are this way is also why we're here, because we've like really dove deep into where does this come from and what can we stand on, and like does our truth really match our practices, and trying to ensure that they'll align. Yeah, I would say for me, it has largely been about like firstly relationship and the relationship you have to land and to people and to the way in which you respect how things have gone on, like what our real history is. So for me, when I was getting started out, I was doing Thai yoga massage and restorative and yin yoga, like hours and hours of yoga. And yet I didn't feel right teaching yoga because it just felt so wrong in my mind, that so many people from India and from where yoga origins, like it's a wider region as well, from where yoga origins had come from, don't really get to practice and bring that over in a way that feels safe, and that we were getting this really like fitness whitewashy version of yoga, and it was just very difficult for me to reconcile with that and step into it looking the way I do and coming from the lineage that I do. And so I sort of vowed to myself that anytime I'm teaching yogic practices that I'll honor and speak to, just even for a moment or two, where things come from, to keep reminding people and to bring in some other element. But it's interesting that I never really drifted towards teaching yoga as a main thing. And I think that kept me still rolling and trying to find a place that felt more like home. And that to me was about right relationship, because my ancestors had been to India. And so I found out I found this out, that my ancestors had been to India and had a positive relationship. And so I think I felt this like real strong need to protect. And those ancestral heritage items that led me to understanding the history about India were also a huge source of wounding in my own family line, which brought me to Scotland to discover more about my history. So it's a very like full circle thing, and I think very fulfilling when we think about our relationship to these things. So that was feeling really off, and I was like trying to resolve it. And the more I looked, it wasn't just like, hey, yoga isn't for me. And I didn't just let it be about like me and my identity, but there was some like deeper story that I think needed to unwind. And actually there's a couple items from India that ended up going back to like an Indian palace restoration project. So it's like we righted the wrongs of the ancestors, which feels like a very movie-like thing to be able to say. So I do believe like addressing origins is important. When I would talk about the chakra system, it would be explaining that they're the Vedic chakra system, and chakra, can be translated into wheel, and trying to, express that this is really valuable. And so it's something that we want to see where it comes from. And it is very valuable to a great deal of people. And for me personally, coming to Scotland and trying to learn practices that felt like shamanic healing, but are difficult to call shamanic healing, but is also difficult to call druid or pagan, because they aren't necessarily directly rooted to a specific religion. And most Celtic druidic ways have been wiped out from history. Felt very challenging. And so I would call what I do neo-shamanism or cross-cultural shamanism if I was going into some academic sphere, describe to people what this means. But what I find is that, when you look at the medicine itself needs to be shared with the world. And so again, if you're honoring the fact that this is healing that is being done with your rightful intention, to me, that is honoring the origin. The origin that all of these healing practices have come from is from a place that people within communities were like, we need to figure out a way to connect with non-ordinary or to connect with plants and earth around us to be able to help our people. And so at the baseline, I would hope that most people around the world who are developing and practicing healing work will respect the fact that we have lots of varied origins and lots of lost histories. So I would say, wherever you can, I would recommend understanding your own lineage, trying to explore where it is your own lineage comes from. For example, my Scottish lineage, there's a way back ancestor called James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose, and he was a military strategist, very devout to God, and he wrote poems. And so part of my ancestral healing has been actually exploring the heart of the ancestors that come from my masculine line, because so much of our wounding has been from a masculine patriarchal society and this industrial war based. I was like, I can't understand how my relatives way back when were like warmongers in some kind of way, or, you know, such a military strategist. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And it just felt so aggressive. And it really feels like I've come into my own healing voice and womanhood through understanding more of their stories with compassion and with the lens of history and what it meant for them. And so I actually have like returned to, really respecting, I think, much more of their tools and what they've passed down. The heart of Montrose is actually kept in a box somewhere. No one knows where it is. Really interesting, more and more fascinating ancestry stories from my Scottish line. So yeah, I would say like right relationship and coming into right relationship with your land as well. When I visit places and I'm nomadic, I go and sing to the land, and I sing to ancestors, no matter if they're my ancestors, but the ancestors of the lands that I visit. And whenever I visit so-called Canada now, or Turtle Island, I am like usually weeping. Like usually it's very difficult actually for me to get through a song with the land there. I think just because the pain for me feels so much more recent than what I'm used to in other areas and from being here in the UK. So that's just something that I'll share, is more of, I don't really share that as like to clients or things, but this is just part of my personal practice of feeling in right relationship with land and with offering these practices on lands that are only one or two steps, removed from my own ancestral lineage here in Scotland and also in the Netherlands. So yeah, that's my wandering answer, I think, of how to engage with lots of random suggestions. I think it's finding your own way to feel like you have right relationship and that you connect to your own lineage if possible.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much, Kate. Jana?
Hello. Well, I'm going to approach this from a couple of different ways because being Native, I get a lot of questions around, well, how do you share this? And why do I use the title shamanic practitioner? I use the title practitioner because I'm sharing the knowledge. And the knowledge comes from many, many things. It comes from lines and lines of ancestors. I'm Polish, I'm Jewish, I'm Russian, I'm Native. I mean, the list goes on, right? And in the United States, especially, a lot of our history has been erased. We do not know a lot of our history. And it is now starting to come out in different ways, different publications, and the government is still wiping part of our history. It was done just this week. And so, not to get political about it, but at the same time, the United States has chosen not to honor our history in the way that many other countries have. I did a beautiful retreat in Canada where I walked in and the history felt so strong and alive, and the honoring was something you live every day. I did a sermon at a Universalist church there, and on the podium, there's an immediate page of this is the land you are on. You're on this land. This is who is here. This is their timeline. And that doesn't happen in the United States. There's reservations, there's these things, but it does not happen like that. So I've made a very conscious choice to honor and bring that into my own practice. But when someone comes to me as a client and says, I want to learn more about shamanism, which is what I teach in many different ways, along with nervous system regulation, and all kinds of other somatic modalities. But when someone begins exploring spiritual or ceremonial practices, the very first thing that I believe that they should consider is intention and relationship. And then spiritual work is not about collecting rituals. It's not just about, oh, they do this and I want to do that too. It's about understanding why a practice exists and the lineage that it comes from. So before stepping into any tradition, it helps for me to ask people three questions. And I want them to ask this of themselves. Who does the practice belong to? And what was it originally used for? And how can I engage with it in a way that keeps spirit of this practice intact? And then honoring those origins doesn't mean that you can't explore it and that you can't practice and try the things that we're talking about. It simply means that you do so with curiosity, humility, and responsibility that looks like learning the history. It looks like when you do a sermon in another country and you're on someone else's land, you honor that and you say that at the beginning of the sermon. You recognize it. So you learn the history and the cultural context. You practice whatever you want to explore with reverence rather than just consumption. People talk about sage is a really big topic, and so is Palo Santo. How are we sourcing it? Where does it come from? How do you make the choice to honor those things appropriately when every metaphysical shop has these things for sale? Well, you ask about the ethics and the integrity behind these items for yourself so that your choices are in alignment with what you really want to believe. So practicing that reverence rather than just consumption is really important. Crediting the culture or lineage for the teaching that it comes from, like I'm talking about when I got to do that sermon. You credit it, you talk about it. This isn't something you put behind you and act like it doesn't exist, because hundreds of thousands of people have died in these practices. And it's really important for us to recognize that there is history here that we're working with. And I'm not talking just about the native world. We're talking about, I mean, Kate brought up her pagan lineages and the history of Vikings and all of these other countries that have gone through wars. All of these practices have been through wars and difficult things. And so putting the idea that we're still standing and that how do we honor them and honor those that have passed with our beliefs at the same time. I like to make sure that I tell clients to avoid the commercialism and the commercializing or claiming something as your own if it comes from another people. Again, if you want to explore it, I've been led by many, many different elders, different cultures to, yes, we want to share the practices as remembrance, as honoring, as teaching as we move forward. Because if we don't teach as we move forward, the practices die. And that is not what we've been told by the elders. We want to keep these practices alive. So we enter this work with gratitude, with integrity. And as, like I said, if it comes from another people, how do you have to find your way to honor it and work with that? So when you approach a practice as a guest rather than an owner, it naturally becomes an honoring, respectful, and spiritually aligned thing that you choose to do. You learn in time that your body will show you if you can lean into your energy fields. It will show you if you're in alignment. If it doesn't feel right, like Kate was talking about, yoga didn't feel right at the beginning until she learned more about her lineage. If it doesn't feel right, there's something to question. There's something to look for. There's something to dive into. So I encourage myself to very, very, very authentically watch my alignments. And I encourage all of my clients to learn. Ask the questions. Don't put them behind you and move forward with your strong integrity and alignment as best you can. And culture is to be shared. Culture is not something to be gated and guarded. It is to be shared, acknowledged, enjoyed. And that's a big thing that people are like, well, I'm afraid. How do we drop the fear and just learn? So that's my challenge. Drop the fear and learn.
Thank you. And Josie?
Oh, wow. This is such a wonderful conversation. It is such a gorgeous thing to bring light to really it's the living legacies. Uh, the reason why I've been building my work online around rewilding the mythic self came from that deep dive that I kind of went on a journey similar to Kate in terms of, well, it really was that seed of wanting to be in integrity, that it was not my intention to ever appropriate other cultures' healing practices. I want to hold that this can be quite heavy work to initiate into. It's really taken me 6 years to get where I am now in holding a presence with even within my own lineage. I want to speak a bit to how our economic systems can get overlapped with spiritual practices in ways that can propagate a harmful relationship, as we've been kind of speaking to. And one of the keys that I've learned to notice that is when there are hierarchies embedded within spiritual practice can be a little bit of a hint sign that that could be how mechanisms of sorry I use such big words because I can't I'm rewilding myself out of the academy so humor me a little bit and I'd love to have conversations too outside of this if it feels like some of this is going over the head but one of the things that you'll come across with this conversation is looking at what is called like the culture of white supremacy. And that is something that has been somewhat imposed where certain belief systems that maybe originate from European culture are putting in this power relationship. That's been a key for me of kind of taking a step back, breathing through it. And at least for me, I'm interested in developing that aligned relationship with the land where it's more about coming together in a circle than maintaining a hierarchy or superiority or things like that. So I think if you're coming into practice and it creates a power dynamic that isn't seeking aligned empowerment for all, that could be a key, like a red flag that there maybe could be some signs maybe not appropriation or this has been really important work for me to it's called like decolonizing imposing certain future beliefs instead of engaging with mindful intentions that get brought forward um, I think that having some space where you can create even some distance from things that maybe can be kind of dogmatic or sort of rigid to approach them with curiosity and flexibility. And I've heard this from other panels too of checking in with your body. How does this feel? And I wouldn't be surprised if you're opening up to this work, particularly ancestral work, for the first time that can challenge a lot of us that have maybe grown up in high control religious context, which is true for myself. And a big part of why I do work is to heal my own lineage's relationship and to reclaim agency and spiritual autonomy is a really beautiful thing that can come from critically engaging with this work, allowing there to be some space to process even the grief that can come up from this. I personally am a settler colonial descendant of from Icelandic folk healers that settled in the Timpanogos territory that is currently named Spanish Fork in the state of Utah, which has had, several centuries dance with the Latter-day Saint Church. That particular lineage in my own body, they have beliefs about ancestors that don't resonate with where I am currently. And so this is kind of going around and about, but I think being in touch with your body and getting a sense of how spiritual practices have maybe been used to rationalize harm and knowing that we have the capacity now as a collective to come together and not just understand the historic context of those traditions, but also be part of a movement to reclaim our agency as descendants and evolve those legacies that maybe have caused imbalance and harm in ecology and rewild them towards a destination where there is ecology and belonging. And it's such a beautiful road to go down. But we want to be mindful of how the economic system may be intermixing with the spiritual practices that are actually detaching from that context as well. I think I'm going to stop talking now, but thank you for such a beautiful question.
You all did great. And sometimes with these panels, I also like to add some things that have come up for me that are specific to PsyChicks. And you had mentioned, Josie, about, for instance, the white supremacy question, right? And in running a platform like PsyChicks, which really it's a self-submission, right, to sign up and join. But people may look, for instance, on our website and see, oh, it's like majority white women and there's, a token person of color, or they may go like, oh, there's not enough diversity here, and that may lead them to like either criticize it or dismiss it or think that somehow like we're gatekeeping, right? And you brought that up, and even in presenting this panel, part of me was like slightly self-conscious, and I'm like, oh, because we do have women of color in our collective, it just was not the right fit for the panel for them. It's not their area of expertise, and they were more than welcome to be part of the panel, right? But I become self-conscious as a marketer, right? Oh, are people going to look at this and again assume that like what our intentions are? And I think you guys all addressed this so well in each of your individual responses without having to blatantly say that like it there's all sorts of different origins of different practices that people can take interest in, and looking for what's authentic and genuine to you. Like, for instance, Kate going to Scotland, your own individual experiences with this, and how you've kind of also acknowledged, right, that it's just because something is not necessarily like you can both explore other people's like culture while also taking the initiative to understand yours, to kind of see how you fit into the big picture of these things. Because I do think, and has Josie, because her answer was most recent to this, so I'm just kind of going off what she said, to make sure that you're not immediately going towards something that would be viewed as appropriation, or, kind of like overstepping also into areas that need to be, safe for people to talk about things such as like white supremacy, and we both have to honor the fact that some of those spaces might be close to us because they're going to talk about the things that people have done to each other in these various different kind of cultural groups, but also then have an interest and be open-minded to going into those places when it is open to you, so that you can learn, and so you can also bring your children to learn as well, so we can also kind of start to address some of these concerns. So that what came up be broader on that conversation. I think you all did a great job. Let's move to our next question then here, because what we really want to do, right, is build people up to that authenticity, that to make sure that whatever it is that they're choosing to do is authentic and genuine to them within respect of the context of what they're doing. So our next question is, how can someone discover their own unique and authentic spiritual expression without crossing the line into appropriation? And for those who feel anxious about doing it wrong, what guidance can help them navigate this with clarity and confidence? Jenna, you're starting on this one.
Awesome. I face this a lot. People really want to learn, and I've been building with this and working with this my entire life. So this felt really important to me to answer. So when people come to me and ask about, being authentic, I want them to recognize that authentic spiritual expression begins with your soul's natural language. It's already within you. You just have to get in touch with that piece. The ways you can feel connected to spirit without forcing or borrowing, like I really talk about, we don't have to force this or borrowing identity. So a lot of times this comes through for people with nature connection, noticing their sensations. We've all talked about how it feels within our body. The creativity aspect. Kate talked about a lot of her creativity. Josephine talked about being an occupational therapist. I actually trained as an assistant OT at the beginning of my education career as well. So I know that feeling, but we all keep talking about it being in our body and the need for creativity to get behind us. Creativity connects with some of the lower chakra work, which connects with being ourselves and that authenticity. So the creativity piece behind this, I think, is really important for all of us to notice. When our hands are active and engaged, we notice our creativity flourishes. Dreamland is another place that I find people connect through and where this shows up. Ancestral memory. We all work with ancestral memories. Those lineages show up within us, and it's important to notice that ancestral memory plays a part in how we have our own authentic spiritual expression, our own personal symbolism. What I stand for and what all of you our whole panel stands for are similar, but yet so different in our identities that it's important to know where your own personal symbolism is. And we all have talked about that inner knowing at the same time. We have the questions of, do we see, do we hear, do we know? A lot of us came to this work because we were called and we have this inner knowing. So as we're talking about that authentic spiritual expression without appropriating, it feels like we all have an inner knowing about our world and our work in this realm. So I'm saying that to remind us that you don't have to claim a tradition to be spiritual. And I think that's really important. Even though I have so many lineages behind me, I might feel more of this than that. And at different holidays, I might use different ceremonies to connect with those traditions in different ways. For example, at Christmas, which I do practice some Christian ceremonial religious moments as long as with other things beside that as well. But we do have certain things that connect more with my Polish ancestry than my native ancestry. And honoring both of those is completely acceptable and completely aligned with my work. So you don't have to claim a tradition to be spiritual, but you do have to claim your truth. And I stand strong in claiming my truth behind that. So to me, part of the key of avoiding appropriation is remembering. It's being inspired by tradition without necessarily impersonating it. So do it your way. There is ways to do that without having the appropriation happen. You can respectfully learn from a lineage without claiming that title of that lineage. I don't believe that I have any Indian, like from India, lineage within me, but some of their practices are absolutely gorgeous and amazing. And I honor that in every way. I might not use it all of the time, and that's perfectly acceptable. But when someone else around me, I can either educate them and say, hey, do you know about this? Where did it come from? How does it feel to use that? And then practicing universal principles. For me, those universal principles are journeying, breath work, meditation, prayer, energy work, different offerings. Kate was talking about her offerings to the land, a song, a gratitude. My offerings might be corn flour or tobacco or other things that match my lineage and that I feel aligned with. Fire ceremonies. There's lots of different fire ceremonies from lots of different cultures, but how did I choose to do it? How did I not necessarily mix different cultural ideas, but how did it feel best for me to put forth to do with others? And so mixing those and pretending not to belong, but working with those cultures. A lot of people talk about the fear of doing it wrong. I think Brandy said that a minute ago. There's fear when it comes to bringing these different things in. So appropriation to me comes from the entitlement, not from mindful curiosity. I think we've all said be curious, experiment, work with it, talk with it, learn. And if you're asking the question, you're already on the right path. The curiosity about this has to be there. And if you're worried about the fear and the appropriation, the first thing to do is begin self-education. Spirit does not require perfection. Spirit requires your presence. Spirit is a partner in this. It is not necessarily just a separate thing that you step into when you feel like it. So if you're really in alignment, this is part of who you are. This is part of how you walk. This is part of your world and your life. So when your practice unfolds layer by layer, as Kate was talking about already, I started this way and I've evolved to this. I think all of us evolve in our practice. And so with this unfolding layer by layer, we all picture the onion. No one is meant to just get it right on day one. And that goes for us as practitioners, that goes for you as clients, you as people. It unfolds as a layer, and that there's never a right on day one. We do our best, we learn, and then we continue to do our best from there. So clarity around this appropriative issue comes when you anchor in your own lived in experience, in my mind. The confidence grows when you allow spirit to guide you in ways that feel natural, grounded, and honest. Work with that feeling within your body and work with that alignment. And to me, what I've been taught and told and work with is that the curiosity helps eliminate the act of appropriation, and the honoring is a really big piece.
Thank you so much for that, Josie.
Wow, thank you so much. I really resonate with what John. Oh, and is it Jana or Yana? I apologize if I'm getting
It's
it
okay.
wrong.
It's Janet, but thank you.
Okay, Jana. Okay, gorgeous. Yeah, so I think this is such a deep question. And like speaking a little bit as a descendant of settler colonial lineage, this has been so vital and important in healing my own relationship to spirituality. in finding our own authentic connections to the spiritual world that are untied again from some of those hierarchical dynamics or spiritual gatekeeping, which can often take place within settler colonial lineages as well, and can be just similarly traumatic. To the body and to the ecology, and bringing that back into equilibrium. I think I love Jana's approach of looking at creativity, bringing creativity back to spiritual practice, which sometimes, if you come from one of the spiritual, like growing up with maybe even some hierarchical religious trauma, sometimes it feels like naughty to be rewilding your relationship to spirituality. There's the sense of this is black and white, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what's proper. There can be this sense of if I open myself spiritually beyond this box, am I, oh no, inviting these things in? And that can be part of the legacy of one of the ways in which we haven't totally defined cultural appropriation. I'll just throw out one that I have been sort of dancing around because I think there's likely diversity of perspectives. But one of the ways that cultural appropriation that I know takes place in the United States context is where spiritual practices from particularly indigenous communities, as Jana brought up, were made to be, from a policy level, illegal. And often people experience violence from practicing. It's ironic, right? Because a lot of us are taught in the United States that it was founded on religious liberty, where that's not quite factually accurate, especially for a variety of spiritual practices. It wasn't until really the 1990s that even a lot of the practices that we engage with here regularly on PsyChicks would have been considered illegal. Holding ritual and holding space, even, from more indigenous European lineages would have, faced, tarot readings, I think are still illegal in the state of Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. And so if you make a practice illegal, but then later make it legal, but then structure it in such a way that the communities that originated those practices are not allowed to receive nourishment from them, or all of the abundance from that practice going to a community that might have imposed those sanctions originally. And so I think one of the ways that you can approach this and looking from a mindset of abundance is making sure that if you're pulled to a particular practice, that you're creating aligned exchanges and responding to open invitations with that gentle curiosity that Yana brought up. And I think relating to your spiritual evolution as something that it's allowed, I think you can't avoid that it's going to evolve. In my community in December, we're going to be holding a circle around looking at finding our agency and evolving certain holiday traditions. That is such a gorgeous thing that we can do with our own spiritual pathways, is look at how we can bring things back into right relationship, reclaim our own alignment with self, and view these legacies and these traditions as something that we're allowed to be part of the evolution of. And when you're connected with that creative source, I like to use the artist way for this type of journey. You can you can never appropriate your own lineage or your own connection to spirit. And when you are creating something authentic from you, that's where you're contributing your gifts to the collective and can feel a sense of security and wonderment with your spirituality, which I think is such a beautiful medicine for all of us.
Thank you so much, Josie and Kate.
Beautiful. Well, I feel like you both have shared so many things that I was thinking about in relation to this topic. So I actually kind of feel like storytelling a little bit, some examples here, because I really agree with Jana saying that like we actually need to slow down and feel our connection or disconnection. And also with Josephine, that largely I think we are struggling with like a disconnection due to these systemic challenges and to erasure and to absolute violence that has like just the atrocities that colonization has created, as far as yeah, really causing that disconnect. And a lot of our sensitive people will feel that. And so that fear of doing it wrong is also the fear of like taking part in what we already know and feel is an atrocity, is absolutely like wrong. And so we don't want any part of that. And then that stops us from being a part of the good parts of what comes from that. And so similarly, you know, as we're doing this ancestral healing work and deepening our connection to the lands that we come from, whether we visit them or not. Like, obviously, it's easier for me to go visit Scotland because I was like, I really want to go. And then it was calling to me to learn shamanic work here versus learning it on so-called Canada. But as we get into that work, it is really about what is happening in our bodies, and we carry all of our ancestral lineage like in our DNA, and it's a part of us no matter what. I see a question coming up later that sort of touches on this, so I won't go super deep into that, but I also believe that our past life and our spirit and light bodies also have lineages, and so we can feel connected to a lot of different lands for kind of not really knowing why, and I'll get back to that in a second as well. These little stories. Josephine, I forgot to mention earlier another kindred spirit moment here, which is that my mother has quilted my whole life. And I really, really love quilting and weaving and handcrafts and traditional crafting as a way of recognizing not only art and creativity, but also culture and tradition. And just recently this week, I purchased some tablet weaving cards to start weaving bands because I was feeling disconnected to my own feeling of creating alongside my nomadic wandering. It feels like I can't just hang out on the ether in the internet and feel like that works. And I'm happening to head to a Viking festival next year. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll make some bands that feel like they honor both the Celtic lineage, but also my bloodline in Viking regions as well. And so it can be fun, and it can be simple, and it can be of the body and of the earth. It can be these things which are gentle, and it doesn't need to necessarily be, it can be, but it doesn't necessarily need to be powerful forces of like activating others in order to stay true to yourself. And you don't necessarily have to share it with others. Like, there's a lot of pieces of my ancestral healing journey that, unless they make it into the film I'm writing, aren't really going to be a part of my regular practice, but it is a part of how I show up to this work and how I feel good about bringing my own work forward. And I really like to echo what I feel like both of you have touched on, this idea of like universal practices, or the idea of heralding a new way forward that allows us to share in what is universal, like breath. Breath is universal. Dreaming is universal. Like Jana said, dreaming, I think, is one of these things all of us can connect and share on. One of the Oracle Fest speakers, David Bouchard, he's a really beautiful Indigenous wisdom author, and he was like a principal and a teacher for many, many years. So he's very good with children as well, and has written children's books. And every time we speak, like, he'll play a flute and I'll start crying. And I feel like such a deep resonance with the way that he sees the world. And he's written about the 7 sacred teachings and actually how shared they are throughout so many different cultures and so many different traditions. And ultimately, we're all looking for healing and connection. And so whatever allows us to get closer to that, I think, is in right relationship with our collective consciousness and with our global community. We have to understand and admit that we are able to share much more knowledge and information than we used to be, and that comes with pros and cons. And so honoring the lands that items you work with come from, I also feel like is very important. It's like well known that white sage is a challenging thing to work with when you're not buying it from an ethical source. And I actually feel it like, I feel like dead energy when you get it from somewhere that really is like not right. And so I often won't use it because I'm not in, I'm not on Turtle Island lands really that often as I used to be anymore. And so I've taken to gathering herbs and plants from Scottish wilderness and saying, okay, well, I can burn that too. It's fine. Like, it still works the same, you know, and trying to work with ways that feel, again, like simple and rooted in earth, I believe will bring you deeper healing. And then recognizing the impact that your your stories and cultures have in your body as well, and doing your best to relieve them, you know? So it can be simple as even like maybe you're doing some physical healing. Like I myself was healing, and I've done a really good job, I'll say. I haven't had migraines in a long time now this year, but I was riddled with them. Like just, they were way too often. And turns out they were from this really internal pressure from my mother's side, the Dutch side. And as I continued to learn more and more about that story and not avoid the pains that were held in that lineage, so much of this was able to start to be relieved. And this creative side of me coming out is definitely part of this migraine pressure relieving. So hopefully with this weaving it, they're just completely out of there now. And I echo again, Jenna and Josephine, I think both have said this at some point, which is like being curious and asking questions, because I don't think being a know-it-all is helpful in this scenario. I just don't think it's ever going to serve you the right way. And ultimately, I always want to be listening, you know, and yeah, two stories, but ultimately, like recognizing that spirit itself is universal. And so what are we closing and what are we opening to is what I would just ask yourself. What are we closing off if we choose not to practice spiritual work because we're worried about the fear of judgment of others? And when that discomfort is coming up, how are we working with it instead of running away from it and allowing deeper healing of our whole collective to occur? So two stories. One is that I was receiving all of these visions constantly and incessantly in a way, and dreams in a way where I was like definitely ignoring them, you know, and they like repeat and repeat and repeat because you're like, I don't want to touch that one. Actually, that one feels really big. I'm just going to leave it for now. And they're like, no, this isn't leaving you. And it was of these children in Madagascar. And so I think you can presume that if the vision was me helping children and reducing violence in Madagascar and helping to balance their climate at the moment is quite tough. And it would bring me to tears. I would be doing psychopomp work, which is helping people cross over to the light who have departed, you know, physically, but spirits are still sort of hanging around. I was constantly taken to Madagascar and then crying over these children and feeling like this isn't right, but who am I to feel like I should have any say or any power or any any reason to go to Madagascar and act like this is part of my healing to help with in the world. And I was working in a shamanic healing circle where we were doing actually a Norse tradition of the vulvas. And there were 3 oracles at the head of the room. And so I asked them this question because it was the heaviest thing on my heart. Because for 6 months, I had been plagued with these dreams and these visions that I kept ignoring. And then finally said, I just feel so, I was humble. And this is also, I think, a very important part is humbling ourselves at all opportunities in general in life, but also when we're navigating the complexities of culture-based work, or culture-focused work in some way. This is definitely culture focused. I'm definitely trying to go there and like help them improve the way that they relate to each other, and reduce violence. And so I went to, and it's funny because I can feel this like nervousness. I was like humbling myself. I knelt down and asked the oracles. I said, I feel so far from the woman who would be able to live out these visions. What is it that I need to know? Because I was thinking they might say, oh yeah, leave it for someone else. Fingers crossed, being like, hey, this is a lot. I still don't know. I was still very unsure. And the way that this oracle moment worked was really that they had each like a staff and were sitting at a height. And so they would like tap the staff if they had a message, if they felt like they had something that they needed to share. And for the first time in this whole, we had been doing this for at least an hour. And for the first time, like all 3 of them hit their staff at the exact same time. And it was like, like a crack kind of went through the room. And each of them had this message of like, oh, you already are that woman. And also you should bring your music or something, like, and I felt like, well, that's just too simple. That's just too simple, to say that what visions and journeys we are receiving are meant for us. And so it is our task to figure out and to try and work with that. So about every month I go in and do, it's tough on my heart right now to do much more than that. But about every month I sit with learning and just with trying to understand from a distance until I'm able to go there. It's trying to understand from a distance what it is I can understand, what I need to know, how do people live, what are the stats, and what are my feelings around what could be possible from where I stand in the world. And yeah, and so that's, I guess, just a story to say that I also have these doubts and challenges on different parts of my journey as well. And when you ask a fellow intuitive, they're also able to help clear the way and see for you, how could you be in further alignment? For them, it was like, you need to bring your music because music is universal. And so why not? Why not be able to connect with people that way? And yeah, and art as well. And then my other story is, yeah, another one where I was quite embarrassed. I was staying with the Hare Krishna in just south of Glasgow, which is already bizarre because it's a whole bunch of Scottish people. And then like the Hare Krishna culture is a bizarre one. I'm not even going to get into like craziness of all of that, but I was a wandering and I was like an explorer and I was just seeing, I was trying to just take care of the garden, to be honest. And it led into quite a lot of different experiences. And I was teaching myself the harmonium and teaching myself chants. I love singing. And so I was singing in the temple on my own because I didn't really like this whole men to the front, women to the back, and like 5 a.m. temple thing. I just was like, that's a little too rigid for me. And just, I didn't vibe with it. You just don't take part in things that feel like, oh, that's not your scene. But I wanted to learn the pieces and respect, the pieces that I could take for myself that felt right. So I was singing in this temple alone. And then this devotee, Hare Krishna devotee, the brahmacharya men, one of them came in and like started setting up a microphone in front of me. And I was like, oh, there's an event later on, so he's probably just testing the mic. And then he said, yeah, you just sit there. I said, okay, cool. And kept singing so that he could test the mic. And then like probably 15 minutes later, like 60 people walk into this room, and I was told to stay at the mic and continue singing. And I had only just learned these things like 2 weeks ago. So I was like, this is wrong. I should not be here. This is not my language. And it's, I would say 90% of the people who walked into that room had Indian heritage. And so I'm like literally singing like Hare Krishna chants to people who they probably know better than me. And oh my gosh, what am I doing? And like, I was just so beside myself that I had somehow gotten trapped in this situation. Like it really threw me off. And, but I was like, well, we're all singing, people are singing with me. And, everyone seems pretty okay with it. Well, it's fine. But as soon as I was done singing, I like ran to the back, scuttled, I would say, like crept or slid along the floor to the back of the room because I was still really feeling the intensity of like, what the heck just happened? And then this family all turned to me. They're like, that was so amazing. That was so beautiful. Oh, thank you. Thinking, okay, well, they just feel like they have to say that. And they're like, where did you learn those melodies? And I said, to be honest, I just made them up. I'm only just learning. I really just made them up as we went here. And what they said to me is they said, Krishna really moves with you. Krishna is really with you. And Krishna is their God. And so they were really like, actually, like, God is with you because of how easily that you learned this and it flowed through you and it was so special. And I realized I should probably get over myself because like that was a gift to them and they really appreciated it. Not that I'm going to go singing Hare Krishna in the streets anytime soon. However, it really taught me a lesson of like, do I really need to get so in my head when what I'm giving is music and what I'm giving is like a gift in that moment? And if someone had a problem, I would easily have heard them out. And I think that's what's important, is to still stay open to challenge without defensiveness and without reactivity. That's what I was prepared for. I was prepared to just be like, yeah, I understand. I'm so sorry. Like, that's what I was really preparing for. And I was met with the total opposite because like what our world needs is connection. And they all felt connected to the idea that someone had learned things and decided to share with them. And it was a celebration day. So no one was like there to get angry at me, truly. So yeah, those are my stories.
Thank you, Kate. You're such a great storyteller. I always appreciate that. So, before we continue, and I'm just going to ask Jana because you know what, as we speak about like humility, I said putting out the ads for this event, people of color, and that I was concerned people would look at it and go, there's no like visible minority on that page. But I was aware that Jana is Native, but when I said people of color, I thought I was addressing that, but I had to check myself. And so it says some. So, Jana, do you include yourself in that terminology if somebody was trying to be, do you include yourself if somebody was to describe people of color? Because here I was trying to be like use the proper lingo, and then I was like, oh, I may have accidentally discluded Jana. So, Jana, do you own that, or do you have any comment to that?
That's a hard one because people look at me and there would be no way, right? But certain times of the year, I look different ways depending on if I got tan during the summer, etc. So I actually asked myself that this week, and I honestly don't have an answer right now. Um, because when you're native, they don't necessarily say people of color. That has been adapted towards other cultures. So, and being in the United States, knowing the lineage is very detached sometimes, I have sat with many, many elders, and that's not actually something that's addressed. Because when it comes down to it, in the United States, I've heard Native people more so say, we are the Americans. But it wasn't America before it was named America colonially. So it's still, I think, something that's in the works, it's in the discussion. I have never stood at a mountaintop and said, I am POC, I am a person of color. I am a person of my lineages and I look the way I look. So that's where I sit with it.
Thank you for clarifying. And I wanted to address that because I was like, the last thing I want, right, is somebody to be like, oh, and the host misspoke, and excluded somebody where they shouldn't, or included somebody where they shouldn't. And navigating that, running a platform like PsyChicks, right, it's always a piece of the puzzle is to make sure that I'm using the correct vocabulary for each member or that I'm trying to be inclusive where there's just things sometimes I don't know, so I have to ask. And I do think when you say like humility and also the word grace comes up, as we're viewing ourselves as like a spiritual community, just like overall. In PsyChicks, we call it like a casual metaphysical community. And if you use the word casual, then you know that maybe you have somebody who's just a beginner, who's just dipping in, or you maybe have people with more experience. And that's in the complete, like, different variety that you're going to get with your interest in the metaphysical, and where we both want to be like not try to own or take something that doesn't belong to us because that would be the inappropriate thing to do. We also want to be able to like communicate with each other without automatically like assuming that somebody else has done something wrong intentionally in a in the context of whatever the setting is, right? Whoever is, say, leading a ceremony. Well, we want to have enough respect to them as the leader of that ceremony to hear them out of their perspective about like why they are doing that, right? Like you don't immediately challenge them just because they're hosting the event and they don't look the way you think that they should look on the, cover art that they put up with that, right? Like being open to people and also having like grace towards each other. If we were in the other person's shoes, how would we like to be received? And how do we speak to each other to like aim towards like more unity versus division, right? There's occasions where, people maybe get accused of being, for example, like racist, right? There's appropriation, and then there's the bold assumption somebody's doing something to be racist intentionally, and that is the other extreme, and that is like sometimes used to divide people, to assume immediately wrongdoing because they should know better. Whereas for what I've found, most women proceeding tr are just trying to do the best they can and find the right vocabulary, find the right expression. Right, somebody even has I'll use this specific to my own lived experience. I was working at Keys Cacao for a good 2 years there, right? And so the cacao ceremonies themselves can become very quickly controversial topic. The company themselves had a slogan, "There's no right way, there's just your way," which in itself was sometimes considered problematic by certain people who wanted to come in and get involved in that. And what I realized is like it has to come start with you, with your openness to learn, to not always be right, to also not always be the person who is the authority, especially if you know deep down inside again intuitively that you are not. There's a lot of things that I don't know. I have a lot of exposure, but I don't necessarily know myself like what is correct to do or say. So it's just always asking, always making sure somebody, if you're representing them. So in my case, like I'm putting people up on a website, on a platform, advertising them for events. How do they want to be described? Not making my own assumptions about them. Because they may look a certain way too, but not have any ownership of that. That might have nothing to do with the work that they do, right? So I wanted to speak to that and also make sure that I gave Jenna a chance to speak for herself on that when I had brought it up myself. And that is the perfect way we can segue to this third question, which is really about the practitioner community and our own behaviors there. So, when you lead ceremonies, groups, sessions, how do you help participants connect with the experience while also honoring the practice's cultural origins and offering your attendees the context that it deserves? This could also go to our one-to-one experiences as well. Like if somebody's coming to you for something that's, you know, confidential, but also the public and the public displays or the public ceremonies tend to have obviously like they have way more at stake, right? Because it's many people observing how you behave and be proceed. Whereas with the one-to-ones, right, it has a little bit more like that's typically going to be confidential. Like it's not going to be like exposed to the world. So let's talk about both, I think, as we discuss this. And Josie, you're up first for this one.
Um, Thank you so much, Kate, for inspiring the power of storytelling. Is so I think I would regard that right as one of those other potentially universal practices, which can sometimes be a controversial word. And with our panel and the vibes I get from us, including you, Brandy, too, my sense it's probably a mutable universal, not like okay, universally these are the standards and stuff like that. It's this idea of kind of, I like the idea of like mycelial networks and things. And so that I think it might be helpful to maybe use some storytelling and how I've taken this on personally. And it's taken me a while, and I'm still I'm in the beginning stages of this. And that is certainly something I've learned from being engaging with these dialogues, often sometimes in academic spaces, but there are so many concerns with the structure of the academy that mirror the structure of industry as well, and how hierarchy and appropriation of resources can take place. And so I really endeavor to be humble in relation to my community as well. So I mentioned in the beginning how I turned to quilting when I was looking to find a women's healing empowerment circle. And so I didn't want to do something that could potentially be incorporating, particularly of indigenous practices in the North American context or Turtle Island context. And so when I turned to quilting, what I did is I signed up for a few local quilting guilds, and I was interested in holding, especially like multi-generational space has always been something I've just been really pulled to quite a bit. And what luckily emerged was I got the opportunity to join the Seattle Modern Quilting Guild, and I kind of dabbled with different quilting vibes and tried to find some of them. I definitely aligned a little bit more with the Seattle Modern Quilting Guild, and they had a guest on, Sarah Trail from the Social Justice Sewing Academy, and we were somewhat similar in age. I think she was younger than me. She happens to be a woman of color, African American woman. She grew up with the sewing industry really prominently. I think when she was a teenager, she got several books sponsored by Michaels on how to do sewing projects for young children. And what she reflected on and what we kind of journeyed together even was she kind of related to how her relationship to sewing was also commercialized as well. So the interesting thing about the folk craft of sewing is it started with something where you just have scraps and odds and ends that you have to save, and then it was a collective communal thing where it's so much work to create a quilt that if you can gather community around and every hand together, hands sewn, it weaves together this wonderful collective group. But one of the ways that what's called neoliberalism, where we've privatized ownership and concentrated resources within a hierarchical structure, quilting is a great lens for that. Because now a lot of the quilting industry today is having your own mega stash of fabric and having your own long arm quilt and having your own sewing machine and doing things on their own. And Sarah and I, she used quilts as a way to bring visibility and voice to human rights atrocities that were impacting communities of color in the United States. She catalyzed something called the Remembrance Project, which kind of brought quilting more back to its origins of bringing communities together and linking kind of people from strong cultures of whiteness in the suburbs into making meaningful offerings to families of color who had dances with police brutality, police violence. And I was so inspired by this project because it allowed me to engage with this folk art in a way that also evolves it towards collective healing and making quilting something that can reconnect sort of the values and virtues of togetherness. So I got to invite Sarah Trail out to my community along with the American Occupational Therapy Association president. I brought together different local folk art groups to this gathering. Of the ceremony, and I got to put Sarah Trail as the highlight, and I was very mindful to make sure that any resources that we obtained would really honor where this evolution of practice was. Sarah Trail was open to mentoring me and how she would facilitate her Social Justice Sewing Academy workshops. So I got to bear witness to that and engage in her doing a live workshop, and I learned from that. And I felt like I wanted to do my own quilting workshops, but I wanted to be aware that I wasn't appropriating her style of doing it either. So I sought a certification with a window between worlds trauma-informed art. And I also sought a certification from Reverend Angel. I don't know how to say her last name. I struggle with last names sometimes, and I want to be respectful, but embodied social justice through transformative programs. So I've dedicated about a year or two into trying to get some mentorship in a engaging with craft in a way that could be trauma informed and aware of intersectional justice things. And I felt it was important for me to implement a workshop in spaces where I had connections to the community. And I thought mindfully of how I could evolve my relationship to it that wasn't like taking exactly what Sarah Trail had showed me. I kind of connected and woven aspects of my own lineage. And now I've personally involved more towards zines than quilting because that's more connected to my inner child too. I think with the previous question, connecting to your inner child is another way to really reconnect to authenticity and this genuine spiritual expressions. So currently, I'm very open in my community to also working with people that really want to alchemize relationship to whiteness. One of the damaging aspects of whiteness is a lot of people from European lineage have lost connection to our own culture through that because assimilation requires you to also surrender your own spiritual autonomy. And so we heal as we reconnect with these practices and these questions. It also brings us connected to our own indigenous lineages as well, which is to not say that every human, every living creature lives and belongs on the planet and has that contextual history. My personal belief is that there's a collective family tree that also includes non-humans as well. And so I just relate to that. So in my work with Rewilding the Mythic Self, I use some of those supportive frameworks of implementing trauma-informed art circles. I've mentored with people to do gender-inclusive circles because I'm also mindful of how gender gets. Sometimes there's really rigid conceptions of gender, and I think that's a really healing thing. So I want to hold circles that aren't just for cis women, for example. So I've sought mentorship and I seek to be transparent. I seek to be humble and I seek openness to understanding and repair. And I believe that there's no way to do things perfectly to anybody's standards. So I know that my work isn't always going to resonate with everyone. And I just try to stay open and try to detach my workshops and my one-on-one sessions from any hierarchy. Part of being trauma informed is allowing whoever the client is or whoever participates in the practice their own connection to agency and allowing them to make choices and relate to their own things. So I thought that that might spell out that I've invested years at this point of trying to seek mentorship and then to even present my offering somewhat humbly and beautifully and be open to feedback too.
Thank you. Great response. Okay, next up. Oh my goodness, how am I forgetting the order? I was just immersed there. Kate, you're next up.
Um, yeah, I love that. And thank you for more storytelling. I do think it's one of these universal practices is telling stories. And some of the retreats that I'm now doing in Scotland are story and soul retreats, because my friend, she's a travel tour guide and she's so good with storytelling. And like, I could just sleep, drift away listening to her voice with folk tales. And it reminds me that there's a lot of lack of knowledge. There's a lot of people here in Scotland who have no idea of mythical beings from different areas. And then there's a lot of people, I think, further on down the line, before we would all communicate and judge and put people in categories. So obviously, I think with social media and being online, and I just found out this week, so it just feels very fitting that my great grandfather, who was a minister, and so he was a chaplain at a church, actually at like a military fort as well. So again, more of this military connection, and the spiritual as well, and trying to reconcile that in my brain in some way. This violence and spiritual is clearly a big part of my journey. That feels authentic to me to share now, is that I found on this forum that this woman has letters that my great grandfather wrote to her grandmother. And in the letters, he's being like so kind to her and like he's helping her through something in life. And he also mentions that he saw Nessie, like Loch Ness Monster, which I love because I hypothesize with my very stoic father often about like whether Nessie exists or not. And so I think it's like very sweet to think that we don't actually always know. We just don't actually always know. And to be so finite about like everyone felt a certain way or not a certain way is kind of silly, because it's kind of cool to think that this ancestor of mine, this only, not very far removed, a great grandfather, it's like, well, I've seen Nessie like so certain about this mythical being, even though that's not a Catholic concept at all. They'd be like, excuse me, I just think it's so beautiful that like the land can speak with its own stories as well. And so I like to make space for the land that we're on, or the creatures and beings of that land as well. So I'm bringing an Oracle Fest event to Mount Shasta next year. And I've been to Mount Shasta. I had to visit the land and sing with the land before I even decided to do this event. Like now I have a very high standard of like, I got to feel it, and I got to know it in my bones before I even would put that out there, and connect to the galactic beings and the Star Nation people. And it's such a beautiful center for so many different beliefs, and it feels like it holds so much power in that. And it is a complex thing, because I really just want like everyone who has some sort of connection to Mount Shasta belief-wise to be able to show up there, which means I'm having like Sasquatch hunters, not hunters, but like not hunters, people who are looking out, guides maybe, for Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and then also folks from the indigenous communities from around there to have them feel welcome to share their stories, and that there's a belief that is like the creator's home in Mount Shasta. Most mountains are like filled with so many beliefs because they're just so awe-inspiring to the people that were on the lands, and so we have to have like a story that makes sense for like immense power and beauty, and the spirits of what's held within them. So yeah, I would say making space for the land and the beliefs that connect to that land, but as well the somewhat newer, seemingly newer principles, not new, it's very, very ancient really, but like the newer principles of starseed or galactic connections, that all of them would be held in the same space and we might get a more full understanding. So that is something that I choose to do, is to try and bring forth however many varieties within one context, so that people can dip their toe and resonate with what feels connected to them. One of the speakers at Oracle Fest, he he channels praying mantis beings. And I was like, whoop, that's a little out there. Let's see what people think. And people love him. And then some people are like, that was a bit much for me. And I go, yeah, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. That, type of frequency is really not meant for everyone. And the people who get it are really get it and really feel it. And then, yeah, and it really doesn't mean anything either way. And so, in a one-to-one context, I often give a lot of homework that would have to do with seeking things out for someone's own selves rather than me dictating to them what they should or should not do. So I really believe across the board in spiritual sovereignty and that we have our own right to feel and to believe and to practice how we feel. And yeah, there is something to be like concerned about, I feel, which is when people are grabbing on to something without asking questions and with like a sensationalism. I'm always very hyper aware of when people feel like sensational about something or radically attached to something. And sometimes that could be like a new way of doing things. That doesn't mean that that person is not meant to practice, but it's like meant to deepen, to understand through, yeah, maybe greater awareness where these practices come from. I can't think of an example where it's been really glaring or blatant, so I wouldn't say the risk is very high. But there is just something that kind of gets I think you'll feel it too. Anyone who's tuning into this, you'll get like your spidey senses will a little bit tingle if there's just something that feels like that's not feeling deep or connected. But to me, that's really just like someone's on that place of learning, and it's not really something that we ought to hold judgment for. So like, for example, if people do get insulted here in Scotland if people are like, Scotland's my home because, 7 generations back, my ancestors were here, and they're like, it's not your home, but like, thanks for visiting. Cool. Other people will have a very different perspective. So like, it really does depend on where you're at and listening. But definitely anytime I'm speaking in groups or doing healing work in groups or retreats here, I will be looking to share more of the practices of the land or of the area and even foods of the area. And I often will offer food to the land or blessings to the land in some kind of way, that it also is showing like a respect for the earth beings. That feels very important. And I don't think enough people know how easy it is to actually feel that deep connection. And so that to me would be how I can help contextualize it for people. So we recently had an ancestral healing retreat in Dunoon, Glasgow, which my ancestors actually really, like if you go far back, were quite linked to that area, which feels very special. And yeah, we dug a grave because it was a death and rebirth ceremony as well. And as we were bringing things back and putting things in the grave, like I felt like a grandmother of mine laugh because I put a potato in the ground. She was like, of course you would use a potato. Like some things never change. And it can be this real simple earth-based practice. That's certainly what has drawn me to shamanic ways, and also the shared practices of drumming, of storytelling, of singing, these things that we have had in so many different human cultures before the divisions of land came about, before we all spoke with each other.
Thank you so much, Kate. And Jana, take us home on this one.
Well, this is something I hold dear because I hold a lot of ceremonies, both online and in person, and have for quite a long time. And I didn't realize until I jumped into this professionally 5 years ago how much of life is ceremonial and how much of life is putting these things in front of ourselves and our families. And you become a parent, or if you're not a parent, you realize that the flow of the seasons are ceremonial themselves, and that you make your way and your own rhythms become part of ceremony. So when I'm leading ceremonies, groups, one-to-ones, there's different ways that I approach different things because the situation calls for different things. But one of my big priorities is to create an experience that is soul deep. It's an experience that I want to be accessible for those that are attending, no matter if it's a group, small ceremony in person, or online, or a one-to-one. And so while honoring the cultures and ancestors and wisdom keepers that carried these practices forward, it becomes paramount during that ceremony. And it's simple and it's rooted in my integrity. And I stand very, very strong in that. And then I acknowledge the practice's origins very openly. If it's not my origin, but we're sharing it culturally, let's talk about it. Let's put it on the table. It's not something, like I said before, to put behind you. So I name where the tradition comes from. I give them the education about where it comes from, who developed it, how it was historically used before, how does it feel within. It may not be something they want to experience more than once. And if it is something they want to experience more than once, how then they continue the education around it. So this helps teach others how to respect, and it helps teach others how to prevent misunderstanding. And I think that's really a valuable thing. I like to explain the intentions behind the practice and make sure that they understand the group's intention, the one-to-one intention. So I'm very clear and upfront and humble about those intentions. So when people understand why something is done, it helps the ritual become relational rather than performative. And that's important to me. I invite participants into the experience through their own inner wisdom. We, again, go back to your body. What is your inner wisdom? How do you recognize it? So, what is their experience through that wisdom? Not just through their cultural identity, but what is their feeling and experience? So, I don't really ask people to take on roles or titles that don't belong to them in a ceremony, or like pretending you're going to be the fire tender or, certain things, unless I know that person's comfortable in history and understanding. And I like to guide people through the connection of lots of different modalities: breath, imagery, symbolism, nature, emotion, intuition, music, drumming, rattling. I mean, it depends on the situation. And so to me, those are some of the spiritual universal languages that come up. But all of the ceremony and space, I have to come to this space for me and the clients that I work with as being very trauma informed. I do not want to create any other harm. I don't know everyone's history, but I have to walk into that space trauma informed and rooted in that reverence. Ceremony is something that honors the people who are guarding these techniques and teachings while remaining accessible to that modern soul who seeks healing. Because that's what people are after. They're after the spiritual connection, but it feels different for everyone. So closing and expressing that gratitude for all those connections, no matter what it looks like, that lineage and the spirits of the land. Like, I know Kate's really big into the land, which I fully understand and support. That is a big piece of shamanism. Storytelling is a huge piece of shamanism. We would not know what we know if it wasn't for storytelling. But a big piece of shamanism, and also the belief of animism. It's the tree people, the stone people, the rock people, the everything that has that living, breathing. And there's lots of controversy on this. Some people say rocks don't breathe. I'll say, but what about crystals? Do they have a connection? Do you feel healing? Do you feel the vibration? Our mother made them, and you can see the animism and the pieces applied to these things that some say are just animate objects, right? And so I like to pay attention to all of the larger beings that come to the table when you're holding something so sacred, and hold that space in such a way of reverence. Um, so making that experience super meaningful, but without altering its roots, making it and guiding people through their own connection rather than asking them to step into someone else's culture. We come together as one and honor that sacred space together.
Amazing. Great conversation, ladies. Great job on the panel questions. It's not an easy topic to talk about, and you all did well. And it was really wonderful to hear from you. I learned some things myself. I was thinking as you guys were talking about all of this, about the previous panel about the New Age spirituality, and one of the common threads that came out of that conversation was that people as a whole, who are, tuned in, are craving things that feel authentic and genuine, as spirituality has gone into popular culture. Things, for instance, like tarot cards and crystals and different forms of spiritual practices have almost become, in some ways, sometimes fashion statements or a trend, or somebody comes into it without any context of its origins, but they're just drawn to it. Everybody starts somewhere, and so we talked about that, like as far as not judging somebody for where they begin, but then also encouraging anybody listening to this on the replay, or anybody just putting it out into the world to be open to the idea of, first of all, at least considering what your source is, like what you are participating in beyond, some Instagram influencer had a tarot deck and it looked cute, right? Like, so I bought one myself and here I am. And even into the deeper things, like I'd mentioned the ceremonial cacao, Kate had mentioned the yoga. Sometimes people go to an event, they see it advertised, maybe it would be an event hosted by someone like Jana. Maybe they come in and they have absolutely no idea what to expect, but they're trying to live their life more fully and try new things. And we want to make sure that that's kind of like what we are encouraging people to do so that it's not like, oh, all of these things now feel super high stakes. The last thing I want to do is do anything wrong. And most empathetic, awakened, enlightened people, that is their goal. They want to feel good, they want to do good, and we want to invite them in to, explore. And so I really appreciate how you guys have created that invitation through this conversation. So here we are. We have a Q&A question submitted from the chat that you all can tackle, and it is, what do you say for those whose gifts came from galactic origin, not earthly lineage of shamanic work? And how do you go about finding your earthly shamanic roots if you don't have living connections and the line did not produce results? So that is an interesting one. I see Jana kind of weighed in on the chat, but I'm going to we're going to start off with how we started to begin with. So we'll start with Kate. And because of the time, we are a little bit over expected time here. So we're going to try to be brief on these Q&A if we can.
Good, because I'm sleepy. This dog is snoring next to me, and I'm like, man, that sounds good. It sounds like a plan. No, I'm fine listening to what everyone has to say as well, but being cheeky. So galactic origin, and I would also include past life origins, and I would also, in this question, maybe also add in like astrocartography or sort of like energy center based or soul place origins. For example, I have two very large energy centers in Madagascar. Once I did my astrocartography, I was like, oh, duh. Okay, there's some like deep pull to that area anyway. And we are part of a collective ancestors group. And so I like what Josephine was saying earlier about this like global family tree and how that is a beautiful way. I also believe it's a really lovely matriarchal way for us to reclaim, how could we help balance some of the major ick, if we can call it, something way soft and more playful than what it is that we've experienced through patriarchal lens. So for those of us who have connection to gifts that came from a place, you don't actually have to declare where it came from for the gift to work and for the skill to be, there's a lot of times I'm not talking about my lineage as I'm offering my work, because it's like coming through Kate and it's coming for the person, and it's not really about the identity in all cases. And so there is this like freedom from separating, from having to land all of it and all the details. And I do believe that can also bring us deeper connection when we're more present with it, without the like, I must know, this or that in every single context. Like we kind of have to relax a little bit in that and find our right places for that as well. And if you don't have so I don't have earthly shamanic roots, as I was explaining. I have earthly Catholic and Presbyterian roots, and I think like the poets and the artists are a way that I've grabbed onto more the connection to, why am I feeling so sensitive and compelled to express and da 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 da. But I also don't think that that's made a huge difference to the fact that my heart is pulling that way. And so your heart is pulling in a direction for your healing, and that, the reason why is not necessarily always your roots. So I would say you don't always have to explain it. And certainly when I teach ancestral healing, a lot of the times people don't know any stories of their ancestors, and not all of mine are very easy to find. And some of them are just from journeying and from my own connection. So it's like whatever I feel that it is. So it's listen to your heart. It's kind of my easiest answer, and finding earthly shamanic roots, you could go way, way, way back, or you could also look to some of these universal or cross-cultural neo-shamanic practices to try and help you feel more connected to our global ancestors if you're not feeling like it comes directly from your lineage.
Thank you, Kate. Jana?
Well, I did sort of answer it in the chat nice and short. But the part of shamanism, especially in the United States and talking about Cherokee lineage, there's actually tons of stories that believe it is a galactic connection. And it's not the only one of the cool things I love about shamanism is that hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, shamans all over the world were connecting in journey time. And all these, the beautiful realms, the upper realm, the middle realm, the lower realm, different things work in different ways. And so the same stories were being told all over the world in different ways, different cultures, different languages, different beings. And what it's come down to is that the earthly connection is part of the stories. And so people talk about their ancestors and their lineage and we don't know where we came from. Well, and a lot of people aren't quite sure and the histories don't fully exist and the papers and the trails and the family trees have been erased. And so then I lead people to, well, if you're looking for an earthly connection and you have the calling to ask about an earthly connection, that's where you start. You start with asking. And then what are you interested in? A lot of my clients have say, oh, well, I really have this big interest in the old Egyptian times, blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like I can have a connection with whatever. Start there. Start with where you feel you're connected with. Start the research, ask the questions. And it doesn't mean that it's exactly your ancestral lineage. It means something, maybe it's a past life. Maybe it's an experience that calls to you to teach you something in this life. I don't have all of those answers. I am not someone's healer. You are your own healer. And there's guides like us practitioners that can help you find those earthly connections or whatever connection you're looking for. And it doesn't mean that it has to be one way. It means when you start asking, you start looking at the broad base and you start asking the bigger picture. And how do you fit into that picture? What feels the most right? What feels aligned? What are you interested in? What do you want to be curious about? And you start there.
Thank you. Josie?
Oh, I'm so excited for this panel and for this to be potentially like a great role modeling and context for an evolving conversation. I feel that one of my favorite things about expansive spiritual curiosity is making that space for a diversity of cosmologies. I think that's actually I think that's like an amazing thing to introduce to this conversation. So thank you so much for whoever offered us here because with many different spiritual lineages all over the planet, there is a really deep and sacred connection to the stars and cosmology. And I would say, like, I would actually really encourage those curious about that. I really love Brandy's work around cultivating a sense of self-trust. And, like, I think when it comes to those galactic messages that are literally out of this world, it can be such a tendency to almost dismiss. Sometimes I wonder if that gets kind of dismissed culturally a little bit easily, or there's lots of stigma around it and whatnot. But I think making space for there to be diverse perspectives on cosmology, right? Like we kind of know this with astrology. There's Western astrology and Vedic astrology, and the stars factor quite a bit into Scandinavian heritage, have a lot. It's very normal for there to be diverse cosmologies that are really connected to how to make sense of different spiritual perspectives. So allowing there to be space for that. And as I know that we're going into concluding. I felt a bit remiss in terms of the last question because there's such a great example of I thought I would highlight a little bit about like an example of appropriation that might land hopefully a little less abstractly. And I apologize that this is somewhat of a tangent in that, for example, well, for me, in my religious ways that I have been open to more expansive spiritual conversations, I kind of went from the Bible Belt to like atheist and academic and everything through a scientific lens. And in a way, even in the science, there is a cosmology the like scientific academic lineage of things. That is, it's kind of its own perspective. Science and academics sometimes also can become really dogmatic and not make space and will sort of dismiss and demean more metaphysical perspectives, and that also comes from a colonial legacy. And so it's been so healing for me. I thought I could explain this concisely in my head. I kind of can't as I'm like putting it out there. Um, I think it's so important just to be open to diverse perspectives. And I still incorporate a scientific lens in just making space, which isn't certainty. Um, I'm just really hoping that those who are listening on this panel are open to connecting with each of us and offering diversity of perspective, because I think that's built into the spirit of PsyChicks. I'm really hoping that folks might consider checking out our work because the thing I was going to try to explain concisely is my most recent event in Rewilding the Mythic Self. We talk about the origins of the Western healthcare system. And part of that was repressing women's folk medicinal practices in the witch burning era is another like really great example of how cultural appropriation has even affected white women quite deeply. In both Europe and the United States, and more recently in the United States, we made folk medicinal practices that were largely facilitated by women, especially around midwifery and childbirth. That was made illegal in throughout before we even had states, right? We made those practices illegal. And it began then that only men that had access to a certain academic standard were allowed to practice things like childbirth or healing practices, and women weren't allowed to earn money from doing folk art practices or ritual and things like that. And that's in the most recent event, we listened to a textbook that talked about this history, this actual historic context, and we reflected on how that's affected us as legacy wise women in my group. So I thought that was maybe a more tangible example of cultural appropriation and how we're now part of movements to make sure that women can be well compensated, that women can access education to hold and revive these wisdom practices. And that's how we can heal our lineage together by being open to diverse perspectives. Thank you for that neurodivergent tangent and whatnot. If you're interested in these things, I hope that you connect to the resources that we're sharing with the group.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I do not see any more questions. I will invite anybody who's attending as a guest just to make sure we don't miss anybody who wanted to ask. So you can raise your hand using any of the hand raising tools in Zoom, but I'm only going to give about a minute for that. Unless somebody shoots their hand up, we are going to start our concluding goodbyes. I want to just thank all of our panelists for coming and sharing. I feel like there could be a part two and three and four of this conversation. It is actually a very rich conversation. And I do think sometimes, especially in the more casual spiritual communities and groups like PsyChicks, sometimes we want to just kind of avoid things that feel heavier and just stay in the fun part of it. I do feel even in the attendance of this one, I feel, it's a confronting it. It's confronting our crap if we're being real. Like to just summarize what conversations like this require. It requires a person to also be like self-aware and vulnerable and willing to admit what they don't know while also trying to communicate something that can be sensitive to an audience if you're trying to do it publicly. So it is complicated. And I do think, you know, as somebody who is taking complete ownership of the thing that I'm building and have founded, I know for a fact, like sometimes when we want to have these more serious conversations, but maybe the community itself is made up of people who identify with either being beginners or just beginning their awakening journey, or just want to make it something fun, which it can be very fun. And in exploring all these different things can actually be fun and inviting, but because of how we enter these conversations, it can feel like confrontational, and nothing about this felt confrontational at all. In fact, it was really balanced and a perfect example about how undangerous having open dialogue can be, and actually how refreshing it can be, as well as planting seeds of inspiration. And also, I love that word invitation. So, thank you so much for your good work tonight. Thank you. I'm going to give you guys the chance to say goodnight to the audience here with us, as well as the replay viewers. Please plug the contents that you're going to be sharing in the follow-up email, so what they can look forward to getting from you. And again, just being mindful of our time, just be concise in doing so. So This time we'll start at the back. So we will start with Josie. You're going to take us home because Jana, you've been in the middle the whole time. You're going to stare at that for Josie. You go ahead. Say goodnight. Just a reminder, just to
Yeah.
quickly mention what you have for offerings that are going to come in the email as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I neurodivergently, I miss direct viewing, so I try to weave in just a conclusion point here. I just really commend this community for being open to this conversation and know that like if you happen to be listening to this and you also come from fellow settler colonial heritage and in my work with many diverse communities around this, I've heard a lot of enthusiasm for us settler colonial legacy people to be intentionally processing a lot of this work. And I would love to hold space for you if you're new to this. I'm creating kind of some accessible offerings. So in the follow-up email, you can get free access to the Ancestral Alchemy Guide, which is a really great introduction to engaging with your own ancestral lineage and maybe with some trauma-informed support. So if you go ahead and click on that link, you'll get free access to the school community. So you just go to the classroom and you can get access to that guide and follow your body as this is here. I hope you feel invitation to start engaging with more expansive spiritual perspective. It's so liberating, right? And some of that discomfort, it's kind of like cosmic shadow work. And we can hold space and healing together and really deconstruct many of those hierarchies that have really hurt our tender spirits. And so I hope that you feel at home in these conversations and a welcomeness to lean in and let them bless you and liberate your own lineage and collective ancestral healing. It's so vital right now. So thank you for joining this panel.
Thank you. And Jana?
Once again, I reiterate the value of having this discussion. It is not an easy one, and sometimes it does feel big and heavy. It doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to be in the dark. So let's bring whatever light we can together. I invite you to follow me on Facebook for Roots and Realms Rising, which is my page, and then Roots and Realms Gathering Place is my private group. I do a lot of plant medicine recipes, a lot of information about shamanism. This is where I post all my events. I do new moon guided journeys on Zoom every month. I do donation-based healing sessions, healing circles, wisdom circles online, and then all of my in-person stuff is listed in that gathering place as well. If you are curious about how to work with spirituality as a parent, the big group is the Intuitive Parenting Spiritwise Village, and that is ramping up and being revitalized. Sorry for the dings. I'm getting messages from my husband, and I've kept it on mute, but his timing was perfect. So I invite you to follow, join along. Most of my work is on Facebook right now. I do have a rebuilding website, so I wouldn't suggest looking at it. It's coming more soon, but it's getting there every week. I am not always a tech person, but it's always getting better. So jump in. My offers for this are a free new moon journey that will be in the email, and follow along and jump in whatever else you're comfortable jumping in with. And I meet everyone where they're at, and I'm excited to meet you if you're interested in connecting and creating that bonded sacred space relationship to support you in whatever you're curious about. I'm here.
It's on to you, Kate.
I don't want to go. I was like waiting for Brandy to tell me to go. So yeah, I also, I would say I echo the sentiment of our entire panel here tonight. And well, tonight for me being over in Scotland. And so the offering that I do have to share, specifically with people who are watching this here and now, it felt right to offer hypnotherapy because, 95% of our brain is like subconscious. And in those subconscious beliefs are a lot of these conditions that hold us back from offering our beautiful selves out to the world and being able to freely express ourselves. And this challenging area also really leads us, the strength of that is it leads us into more individually, spiritually sovereign and authentic expressions that we can share to help our whole world and to lift our whole collective consciousness vibration. So I'm really fascinated by the collective subconscious. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what the heck is trapped in our collective subconscious to have us acting out right now in the ways that we are. And so if you're interested in doing some of your own individual work, sometimes it does connect to how you grew up, your ancestral connections. Because I mean, what were we told as children? That's what was carried on from people behind us and behind us. And so I'm offering 50% off of my hypnotherapy work for anyone who is attending this and feeling the call, to make it hopefully easier for you to say yes to treating yourself with some deep healing work and some relaxing time, getting some rest of your nervous system, also really important for doing this work. So if anything has gotten brought up here, or if you feel a resonance with me and my story or my messages, then there's a plethora of ways to connect with me. My site is called www.heartsfrontier.com, the expanse beyond our heart, this vast unexplored region beyond our heart. This name has served me well for a long time. And my second shamanic name I was ever given was Riding on Light. So it does feel like that is the era that we are going into collectively as well, riding on light and surfing these light waves together. I wrote that we all share the same stars, and so there is a lot more of this galactic work that I'm also feeling called to. Very expansive, non-ordinary exploring. So I would love to explore whatever your non-ordinary is wanting to show you, and help guide you back to yourself, so you can go and express out in the world and heal your lineage at the same time. So fun, mostly.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for so much time and being here. Really appreciate it. Uh, have a great evening. Enjoy your weekend. This was recorded on a Friday, so I'm sending everybody out to go and have a restful and joyful weekend. Take care of yourselves. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Ha.